In the first video of this series, we focused on quarters, eighths, and sixteenths, and the exercise involved just kind of weaving in and out of those three on the drums, starting out slow, and then just practicing moving in and out of those. In this video, we're gonna add another step to it. So I just want to share my approach on drum solos and what I believe makes up a really good one. Now, there are a few elements that are involved in every really good drum solo, but it starts, in my opinion, with rhythmic flow. So that's what I wanted to introduce to you today, just so that you kind of know where you're headed with these exercises. So the way I look at a solo, I kind of break it down to three different types of rhythmic movement. There's flat, there's curved, and there's complex. Now, every interesting drum solo that I've heard has a really good mix of all three. So the first one that we covered in the first video, that is what I would consider flat movement. Flat movement is basically what I consider any multiple of 4 in terms of note value. So quarter notes, eighths, sixteenths, 30 seconds. All of those are basically what I would consider flat movement. And the reason why is because regardless of which one you're playing or why you're going in and out, the flow stays kind of straight through the entire thing. And you've heard hundreds of solos played this way. Once we add the second step, you get a better idea of what I'm talking about. But flat movement, regardless of what you're playing, it all kind of stays the same, right? It's like tack, 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 like it's still all kind of straight. So to give you a better example, I'll just play a short example of just playing a solo, just using the flat movement, and then you'll hear what I'm talking about. You can effectively play a solo with just flat movement and kind of make it interesting. You're just using different stickings and all that kind of stuff. But I find that to really make it something for a crowd to enjoy or to get into, because there's really not much happening, like rhythmically, you tend to want to add some theatrics to it, some stick twirling and blah, 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 to make it a bit more of a rock show type of thing. But in terms of really cool melodic drum solos, the kind that you hear a lot of the jazz guys play, a lot of the fusion drummers play, you're going to need a little something more than just that. Like, you can imagine turning the snares off and trying to play some kind of really romantic, kind of dramatic solo if you're just playing that flat movement. That's cool for rock shows, but if you're in a bar or if you're in a club or something and they give you 5 minutes to do something on your own, you kind of want to make it a little more interesting. So we're going to add the next step to the exercise, which is curved movement. Curved movement involves adding all of the relative triplets of the flat movement. So quarter note triplet, eighth note triplet, 16th note triplet. What these do is it kind of adds this type of flow to your solo. Kind of breaks up the monotony a little bit, you know what I'm saying? So it's like it's flat, and then it kind of does this for a little bit, and then flat, and then this. And it just kind of adds a little bit more structure to your solo. You know, if you can sort of imagine the analogy of looking at, I don't know what you call it, but you know, in the hospital where they got that little graph thing, if it's flatlining, it's basically dead. It's not much life to it, right? But once you start doing this, once you start seeing that, it's a sign of life. It's like a pulse. There's some interesting stuff happening in your solo once you start adding that movement. So we're going to get into adding the triplets into the original exercise that you did in the first video, and you get a better idea of what I'm talking about in terms of flow. To add the triplets to this exercise, basically what we're going to do is the exact same thing that we did in the first exercise, but we're going to inject the triplets inside of their respective spots. So, in other words, you're going to start with a quarter note, and then you're going to play the quarter note triplet. Then 8th note triplet, 16th note triplet, and then if you want to include the 30 seconds, you can do that at the end as well. So it's still very much a progressive step exercise, but this time we're going to shove those triplets in there in front of their original values. So again, quarter triplet, 8th triplet, 16th triplet, and then, you know, you can go from there if you want. Now, it's a very important thing to, first of all, like if you've never done this kind of thing before, start just by playing it on one source. So if you're sitting in front of a practice pad, you can do that. If you're sitting around your drum kit and you want to do it, I'll show you this example here that's really good to do. Just by using your left foot to play quarter notes on the hi-hat, and then just play through each step on, in this case, the snare drum. I'm just going to use the snare drum. So what I like to do is I like to do it 2 bars at a time. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, and then next one. 1, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 2, and then up from there. Okay. So I'm going to play 2 bars of each one, taking a step up each time, and then I'm going to go back to the beginning and then start all over again. This, again, the whole idea behind it is to train your brain, first of all, into knowing exactly what it is that you're playing at all times. Always think about the note value or the subdivision that you're playing while you're playing it, and just get that locked into your head. Because later on, when you start to translate it onto the drums, every note that you play is going to be strategically placed. You're going to know exactly what you're doing. All right? So let me show you this first on the snare, and then I'm going to take the idea and then I'm going to play it on the kit. When you're working this exercise on either your practice pad or your snare drum or whatever it is that you're working on, it's also an ideal time and an important time to start to work on your sticking. Particularly in the progression, once you start getting to 8 notes, it's a good idea to start using different types of sticking and adding a little bit of dynamics to it at that point, because that is what's going to help you get around the kit, so that you can add those dynamics and, you know, use that loud and soft, and just get a little more creative as far as flow, keeping the flow nice and smooth and stuff. You can work all of that stuff out on the pad first, because it doesn't matter what surface you're sticking on, whether it's the pad or the floor or the wall or whatever, sitting there on your drums. The sticking is going to help you get around the kit, particularly once you start to speed up. So during the progression, once you start to reach those eighth notes, start to include doubles and paradiddles in different combinations to help you get around the drums. So I'm going to give you the same example now. I'm going to take it to the toms and spread it out a little bit. Continue to play the quarter notes on the hi-hat, and then you'll see what I mean. Like once I hit the eighth note stage, I'll start to use some different stickings to get around the kit. But essentially, the exercises staying the same. You're just going to keep going from, you know, quarters on up to each step. But as you start to add the different sticking and the dynamics and stuff, the solos, not really a solo, but the exercise is going to start to take a little bit of form. And you know, in terms of flow, anyways. And you're going to start to hear it actually sound like something, like once you start to add the sticking and stuff to that. But again, like this is a brain exercise. This is to help you be fully aware of what it is that you're playing. The fact that you can add the sticking and all that kind of stuff to it is just an added bonus, because you can work on all of that at the same time. So here's that exercise. The last step to this exercise would be to do the exact same thing that I just did, but now you're going to go from there to the next step, which is going to be to completely randomize your structure. Jump from this to this, and then back to this, and then back to that, and then over to this, and over to that, and then just kind of go in and out, just like we did with the very first exercise. But now we're going to do it adding the triplets in there. And by now, like if you haven't already, you'll get an idea now of what I meant between flat movement and curve movement. The structure changes once you add the triplets, and it starts to become a little bit more melodic and a little bit more musical, as opposed to just trucking through and then hitting everything. Once you add the triplets in there, it makes things a little bit more interesting, adds a little bit more rhythmic structure to it, and again, it just makes it sound more musical. So the next step would be, it's a two-parter. I'll just tell you what they both are now, and you can mess with them yourself. But yeah, the next step after that, last one that we did, would be to do the same thing. I used the kick drum for the quarter notes for that example. Kick, hi-hat, whatever. You can do either one. Or both, if you want to do that too. That's cool. And just completely randomize your structure. And just jump back and forth between all of them. And then, the next step after that, which would be, I mean, that's pretty close to soloing as it is, but the next thing after that, like once you really start to get good with that idea, then you include the bass drum inside of the notes that you're playing. So instead of keeping a consistent kick down there, add the bass drum into your phrasing. And now it's going to start to sound like a solo. You know, just using those really basic, simple elements. Just playing all of your rhythmic structures, adding the dynamics with the sticking. That's why the sticking was important, so that the flow stays cool throughout the whole thing and it's not so choppy and mechanical. So yeah, that would be the last step. Just add the bass drum to it. Do the same exercise, same tempo, start out slow. You can work out licks this way. You can work out some signature phrases of your own, you know. Doing exercises similar to this is how I developed a lot of my signature, you know, big money licks or whatever. You work them out slow and then just kind of work them into your piece and you're good to go. So once you reach the end of this part, you're pretty much able to improvise your own solo. Because of the fact that you're thinking a little bit more about the structure and not so much about the notes that you're playing, there's less of a tendency, I guess, to repeat yourself over and over again and run out of ideas. You're focusing on something else. All you're really doing is playing the sticking around the drums. So by the time you get to the end of this, you know, if you're doing this exercise for, you know, whatever, 5 minutes at a time, 10 minutes at a time, 15 minutes at a time, then guess what? You know, you just played a 10-minute solo without really repeating yourself too much. If you get to that point, we're talking about like intermediate to advanced players. So the more creative you get with your sticking and stuff, the less tendency there is, I guess, to repeat phrases over and over again. Because you're going to find yourself getting away from this, which is what a lot of beginner drummers end up doing. They just kind of sit around the drums and just start hitting stuff. Once you use the sticking, your flow starts to improve and everything just starts to sound a little more fluid, a little bit cooler. So, so yeah, that's the whole idea with that. So rhythmic structure, flat movement, curve movement, just work on kind of smashing them together and just practice getting around the drums. And incidentally, if you guys saw there's a video that I have up called the 16-minute drill, or the 16 note drill. By the time you get to the end of this particular exercise and you work your speed up, you're going to end up doing almost exactly the same thing, except you're throwing all of the other elements in there. So if you can do this exercise up tempo, guess what? You're soloing, just like that. It's crazy. So there you go. That's the second half of this exercise. I'm probably going to add some more parts to this later, but these first two videos, part 1 and part 2, should keep you busy for a while. You don't want to rush this process. Because again, by the time you get to the end of this and you're good at it, then you're soloing. Simple as that. Okay? So yeah, that's about it. Good luck with that. And if you got any questions, just shoot me up an email, hit me on YouTube, or shoot me an email on my website. And you know, I'll do what I can to help y'all out. All right? Peace.